I just wanted to do a quick little video on how I put piping into cushions, because it's quite a cool little process. So I've got here some bias binding. Don't necessarily need bias binding for this because I've got square corners, but that just happened to be what I had. So I tend to do it in 2 steps. It takes a little bit more time, but it just makes it a bit more accurate. So here is where I started. So I folded my bias binding and I put some piping cord inside, and then I leave some of the bias binding and some of the cord unstitched. So I've started here, gone up to the corners. So here is, for example, a corner I've stitched in. You can see where I've cut into the corner. Actually, I need to take this bit out as well to make sure that the bias binding folds nicely around the corner. And then I've also tightened the cord a little bit to make sure that this sits nicely and isn't all scrunched up. So I'm just coming up to a corner here. I've already pre-cut into that, so up to the line of stitching pretty much. Now let's see if I can do this with one hand. I'm not stitching right on the binding, sorry, on the cord at the moment. I'll do that the second time around rather than the first time. I've misjudged my cut a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. I'll make a new one as well. So there we go. Put my needle down. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling this quite taut. Let's see if I can do this while still filming. I'm just repinning. So what I have done is I've just in a few places folded the binding and pinned it shut so it doesn't flip open whilst I'm sewing, but I don't pin all of it in, just do a little bit. So now I've got enough room on the binding, but if you can see in this corner here, it's still quite scrunched up. So what I'm going to do now is just pull the cord, and what that's done is it's eased up a little bit, so there's a little bit of extra fabric, but I think that will be okay when we flip it the other way. So now foot down again. Just going to carry on sewing. So I'm going to need 2 hands for this. So I'm going to cut this video short for a minute, and then I'm going to show you in a minute how I join the beginning and the end, because it's quite a nifty process. I'm almost there. I've come around the last corner. I also tend to start away from the corner, so I tend to start somewhere on a straight piece. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut my binding so it overlaps a bit with the original one. I'm eventually going to cut my cord to meet this one exactly. So I'm just going to stitch in a little bit more, but I definitely don't want to stitch. I want to give myself a little bit of space to play with. So make sure you backstitch. Take all this away. Okay, so now what it needs to do . So what I want to do is I want to fold the binding away, and first of all make sure the cord butts right up against each other. So this one, there you go. So you don't want your cord to overlap because it's all bulky and horrible. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to turn the camera off for a second because I need 2 hands to fold this. And of course I didn't put my stand on my camera because I'm being a bit daft. So I'm just going to turn this off and fold it and go back on. Right, so what I've done here is I've folded this one down, laid it down flat. This one here, I've cut the bias at a bit of an angle. I'm going to fold that down. I think I need to cut the cord a tiny little bit shorter actually, because it's just a little bit overlapping still. All unfolded again. There you go. So this one, there you go. We could stitch this down, but then this edge is going to unravel, so I'm just going to tuck that edge under a little bit. Alright, so folded that edge under, folded that one over, tuck the cord in, Okay, and then I'm going to start again where my other stitching finished and just bridge that little bit of the gap there, and then we've joined our bias binding. So what I've done now, I've also cut the corners off on the main fabric, and now I'm going to put the other layer on, trapping the binding between the cushion front and the cushion back. And then I'm going to use I use an adjustable zip foot sometimes I use a piping foot, but actually find this a bit easier. So the next line of stitching I'm going to do, once the front is on, I'm going to butt my stitching right up to the piping cord. And sometimes I find I have to do it a few times, so I've gone through all the layers and I haven't quite hit it, so I might go back and tuck it up a little bit closer. I guess if I did it really tight up the first time around, I could follow that line of stitching, but I've just not found that you sometimes end up seeing that line of stitching popping out to the other side, so I prefer to do it this way.